What's drawn us back? We've heard a lot of great music and we've heard a lot of great seminars outside the Imaginarium, but this has really been our home, and in a really meaningful way, because I think I'm not alone in saying it's one of the few places in the world where I didn't feel like a freak, or if I felt like a freak, it was okay to be a freak, especially as a woman. You know, to be a middle-aged Christian woman who's interested in some of the things I'm interested in can be kind of lonely. And so shame on Dave for the stereotype that women don't watch Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Shame!
Yes. So to speak here is certainly a privilege to me. Yeah, you're not going to be able to see anything. We know that, but most of the clips, probably all of the clips that I'm going to be using are very dialogue heavy. You'll be able to hear, and better you should hear it in the voices of the original characters than my voice reading it off of paper. So I think it will still work, you can imagine. I'd like to kind of get the lay of the land. How many of you watched Buffy? How many of you watched all of Buffy? Like, drop your hands if you didn't make it all the way through. I weeded you out pretty quickly, actually. What about, generally, how many of you watched Angel? Firefly?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Hey, good for you. Dollhouse? Wow, I think there were more Dollhouse than Angel fans. That surprises me. Dr. Horrible?
Yo!
And you're going to come to the sing-along, right? Yes, you must come to the sing-along. Cabin in the Woods? Oh, seriously, you need to watch Cabin in the Woods if you didn't see it. What about the Avengers? Yes. And that does not even exhaust all that we could talk about. The scope of Joss Whedon's work is too big. And also, I'm not comic book woman. I'm married to comic book man who has read and owns Frey. Anybody Frey? Woo! All right, good for you. And what else? Astonishing X-Men, Buffy season 8 and 9. What am I missing? Oh, Runaways. Just yes. And what little I did read. I read Buffy season 8 until I just couldn't stand Buffy anymore, which is not inconsistent with the trajectory her character was going at the end of the series. What little I have read of Frey and the Runaways and some of the canon Firefly comics, the themes we're going to be talking about are all over his comics work too. So you can, you may want to jump in and add some of that, or just mentally be processing that if you've read the comics. I am so appreciative of you being here at 1 o'clock. At the hottest cornerstone ever, I think. And I know how hard it is to stay awake in this kind of weather in this tent, because I've fallen asleep during a lot of seminars I really wanted to hear. So I appreciate that you are fighting the good fight, and I wanted to sort of reward that effort. My sweet husband bought me this set of posters, and then he said, if you want to give them away, I'll buy them for you again. So how many of you seen these Firefly posters? So I have 10 of them, which is basically all of the crew members plus Mrs. Reynolds. Every guy in the room is like, I'll take that. So every day I'm going to ask a few trivia questions. Now it's going to be arbitrary, because the thing is, I might ask a question and 50 of you know the answer, and I'm just going to have to call on one person. So I apologize for the arbitrariness. But if you get one of the trivia questions right, come up to me at the end and I'll give you a poster, okay? Just for grins. And then take it home, and if you're too proud to hang it on your wall, give it to someone who's not. So, let's start with the questions for the day. Varying difficulty. I asked Kevin and our son Sam, who are both Whedon watchers. They got some, they didn't get some. So, first off, easy one. Name the 3 principles of Sunnydale High.
Easy.
I'm already ashamed of you. I'm ashamed. Jim.
I think I can do this, but I probably don't need a poster. Flutie, Skinner,
Snyder.
Snyder, okay,
Snyder,
and
yes.
Wood.
Yes, very good, very good. they gave away Flutie was identified in that little bit we just heard. Okay, well, if that was hard, we may be in trouble. But let's try another names one. Does anyone know what 3 different first names Mrs. Reynolds used? You on the end.
Which one?
You in the glasses, the woman in the glasses.
Yolanda, Saffron, and Bridget.
Very good. All right, very good. And at one point, Mal calls her Yosef Bridge, which is kind of why it all sticks in my head. All right, finally, what is distinctive about the director's commentary of Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog? You.
It's a musical.
That's right, it's a musical, and so much fun. If you've only ever seen Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog, get a hold of the commentary and watch the commentary, because it's awesome. It's almost as good as Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog. Okay, so, back in the early years of the Imaginarium, there was a Buffy seminar here that I attended. That was when Buffy was still airing new episodes. I think maybe they were in season 6-ish at the time. And the show was unpopular with a certain segment of the Christian population. In 2002, in fact, Buffy was rated the worst show on television by the Parents Television Council. But listen what they named the 4 best. Doc. Anyone remember Doc?
What?
My mom loved it. It was Billy Ray Cyrus as a Doc. No, my mom's very sweet. That's not like an insult to my mom. She likes the next one too. Touched by an Angel. Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Which has a witch in it, so I don't get it. And Seventh Heaven. We could do a whole seminar on what's wrong with them saying those are the best shows for teenagers to be watching. But for me, personally, it was very refreshing to come here and hear Buffy being taken seriously. And it confirmed my conviction that there was more going on than witchcraft, lesbians, and young singles having sex, all of which drew the attention of the Parents Television Council. I was a Buffy fan, I was an Angel fan. It took me a while until this past year to make myself watch season 2 of Dollhouse. Now, if you, like me, were turned off by the first season, the second season totally redeems the first one, so go back and watch it again. Loved Cabin in the Woods. Pretty much, yes. Just the most fun movie. Pretty much everything. I'm a fangirl. I'm a Joss Whedon fangirl. I admit this. And I think he belongs here when we talk about icons and images. He is, firstly, a pop culture icon. He appeared at South by Southwest this year, packed the room out, spilled over into the hall. MSNBC had an article on it that called him the Nerd King. And I would say, first and foremost, that may be his kind of spot in cultural iconography. You may have seen the t-shirts or heard the phrases, Joss Whedon is my master now, Joss Whedon is God, like a Joss. But he's also kind of represented in some other kinds of cultural iconography. Firstly, as a feminist icon, both he and many of his characters. He said early, and he said often, that Buffy was specifically created to be an alternative feminist icon to the kind of women that usually popped up in horror films and action movies. And, she's tiny, but she kicks ass, right? And a lot of his characters, his female characters, are that type. Very kind of warrior women, even though they're beautiful and as tiny as Scarlett Johansson. We know the kind of the Whedon woman. And that is manifested in his comics work too, certainly in Frey, which is, a future Slayer. He's also a very iconic figure in the gay community. You youngsters do not know what a big deal it was in 1999, the relationship between Tara and Willow on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It was not the first gay relationship on TV. I would say it was one of the first ones where they acted like normal people. Not either, really flamboyantly gay, or 30-something had a gay couple that were so stiff that you just couldn't believe that there was anything going on between them. So it was a big deal, and he was very intentional about it, in the same way that he said he intentionally advocates for a feminist perspective through his work. Every series that he's done has had some same-sex relationship in it somewhere, and that's very intentional on his part. He's also a humanist icon, and we're going to talk more about that. He's a very outspoken atheist, Joss Whedon. We were debating this morning, would we let Joss Whedon speak at the Imaginarium? Well, I would let him speak at the Imaginarium, but not that he's asking, not that he's clamoring to come, but he is very outspoken in his atheism. He's said in one interview that he's a hardened, bitter atheist. I saw one interview that said, do you believe in God? It was one of those kind of quick 100 questions interviews, and he said, not a jot. So here we are at Cornerstone, and I didn't even tell you anything about myself other than my name. I'm a homeschooling mom. I'm an associate pastor, 5 kids. So I'm on Team Jesus. Joss is not on Team Jesus with me. At least not, not directly. But I do think that there are some things that we can learn from him. I don't want to do the kind of clumsy cultural appropriation that Christians sometimes do, where we sort of crack the Buffy code and show that Buffy is really Jesus, or Xander is really Jesus, or Spike is really Jesus. Because there are a lot of Jesuses in the Buffyverse, and he's honest about that. He says that, that's the world he grew up in, both as an American, and he attended an Anglican school for a while, an Episcopal school where they attended chapels. The Christian mythos is what he knows, and what he often writes out of. But I want us to take his atheism seriously. If for nothing else, and as a show of respect. So I want to talk about Joss not as an icon, but as an iconoclast. Disregard most of what you know about the iconoclasts, because I'm making the analogy loosely to the iconoclasts of the Middle Ages, except that they were destroying what they believed were idols. Now we tend to use the word more for someone who's just destroying things for shock value, the pop artist who dresses up like the Pope. But the original iconoclast, it was sort of a shattering of an idol was the idea. And I think that Joss Whedon attacks the idols of our age because he recognizes them as idols. He might not be calling us back to worship the one true God. He might be calling us away from worship completely, but that doesn't mean he's wrong about everything that he attacks. I would suggest, in fact, that he's right to take a sledgehammer to some of the things that we pin our hopes to, or a steak, or a freeze ray, or Vera, to undermine our misplaced confidence in institutional education, in science, technology, government, military power, the institution of the family, even religion. When our icons are really idols, we need them shattered, and Joss Whedon is ruthless. You may have also seen a t-shirt that says, "Guns don't kill people, Joss Whedon kills people." He's just that hard on not just his own characters, but even our ideals. Because unlike some of the new atheists that I've read, Joss Whedon really recognizes and is committed to a moral struggle. And this is critical to how loyal I am to him, what a big fan I am. He does not hesitate to move from what is to what ought to be. He might not define the origins of evil as we would, but he knows evil when he sees it. In a speech to a humanist group, he gave an encapsulated definition. The enemy of humanism, he said, is not faith, but it's hate, is fear, is ignorance, is the darker part of man that is in every humanist, every person in the world. That's the thing we have to fight. In the description of this seminar, I don't know if any of you read that, I mixed a little Jeremiah and a little Wash Hoburn. When the foundations are all corpse-sified and gross, what will the righteous do? But that assumes that the foundations are in bad shape, and I want us to hear why he thinks that, why he sees them as idols. Consider Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision of the beloved community. In the beloved community, the goal is the flourishing of the individual in a community of love and justice. In the Whedonverse, Instead, we often find individuals not being valued in themselves, but remolded to fit rigid systems of power. Human agency and autonomy are obstacles that gum up the works of social structures. From the very first episode of Buffy, the series establishes a pattern in which institutions are shown to be inefficient, inadequate, and misguided in their efforts to maintain order. And that's at best. That begins with school. The root metaphor for Buffy, and a lot of you have heard this, is high school is hell. And then a little later it kind of becomes life is hell, or life is the big bad. While Whedon intended this to characterize the whole period of adolescence, and I couldn't remember which one of his writers it was that said if he ever had a date in high school, he never would have made Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I found another quote where Joss said he had a perfectly normal, deeply unhappy childhood and adolescence, so we get to see all of that lived out. Although Buffy deals with the whole era of adolescence, of growing up, school itself does not come off looking good. Whedon took the opportunity to critique a wide range of teaching styles through the parade of teachers that passed through the series, often killing or being killed. But today we're going to focus on the figures that most potently represent Sunnydale and public education in general, the principals. Not so much Wood. I thought as a principal, Wood was pretty inept. Basically, the school collapses around him. But he's not there to be a principal. He's there to get, vengeance for his mother's death. I didn't say this at the top. Any of you who haven't made it all the way through these series, there will be some spoilers, but that doesn't mean that you should A, leave, or B, not bother to watch the end of the series, because some of these, I knew ending, what was coming up in the series before I finally got around to watching things, and it doesn't ruin it. So, but be warned. So, we've already talked about who they were, and we're going to pull up that first clip. Buffy has just transferred from Hemery High. This is the TV series, the first episode, kind of their attempt to transition from the film to the TV Buffy in a way that acknowledges that there was a history. And we'll see what Principal Flutie says to her in their first meeting. Or we'll listen, anyway.
Buffy Simmons, sophomore, native Hemery High, Los Angeles. Interesting record. Prior career. Welcome to Sunnydale. A clean slate, Buffy. That's what you get here. What's past is past. We're not interested in what it says on a piece of paper. Even if it says, well,
Mr. Flutie.
All the kids here are free to call me Bob.
Bob.
But they don't.
I know my transcripts are a little colorful.
Hey, we're not caring about that. Do you think colorful is the word? Not dismal?
It wasn't that bad.
You burned down the gym.
I really did, but you're not seeing the big picture here. I mean, that gym was full of vampire... asbestos.
Don't worry. Any other school, they might say, watch your step, or we'll be watching you. But that's just not the way here. We want to service your needs and help you to respect our needs. And if your needs and our needs don't mesh.
Now, what you probably couldn't see is that he started by tearing up the transcript, but he's taping it back together. Hear that and see. Still, as you can see, Flutie is the model of sort of the liberal progressive educator, an advocate of student-centered learning and a sort of rehabilitative approach to discipline. Or at least that's what he wants to be. But almost every scene that he's in, we get this sort of vacillating, like, you can call me Bob, but no one does, or tearing up the record, taping it back together. There's another scene after a student or a teacher has been killed at the school, where he's consoling a student, and he says, I'm always here for a hug, but not a real hug. There's no touching at the school. We're very sensitive to bad touching. So he means well, and he's actually portrayed fairly sympathetically, but his progressive his progressivism is really just a cover for weakness, and it's not adequate to life on the Hellmouth or the real struggle against evil that everyone there faces. Do you remember what happened to Principal Flutie? Right, he's eating my students who were possessed by hyenas, right? It totally makes sense in the episode. And he is very quickly, that's like halfway through season 1, and he's followed by Principal Snyder, who makes his different approach to education evident very quickly. And this clip is from clip 2 is from the first episode that Snyder is in, talking to Giles, Buffy's watcher.
Kids today need discipline. It's an unpopular word these days, discipline. I know Principal Flutie would have said kids need understanding. Kids are human beings. It's the kind of really heavy liberal thinking that leads to being eaten.
I think perhaps it was a little more complex than...
This place has quite a reputation. Suicide, missing persons, spontaneous cheerleader combustion. Gotta keep an eye on the bad element. Those 3.
He's looking at Buffy, Xander, and Wendell.
Kids. I don't like them. From now on, you're gonna see a very different Sunnydale High. Tight ship. Clean, orderly, and quiet.
There's a scream immediately after he says the word quiet. Yet another body has been found at Sunnydale High. Snyder taps into the sense that a lot of us had at some point in our education that our teachers genuinely did not like us, or children in general. And as a parent, I've met some of those teachers. But he's not interested in serving the needs of the student. His agenda is control, it's law and order, and that makes him a minor villain during the entire time that he's in the series, which is all the way through the end of season 3, yes. And he never understands that Buffy is not the problem. He expels her from school at one point, and it's just one of the happiest days of his life at Sunnydale is when he gets to expel Buffy. But despite operating out of a much more authoritarian model of education, he's also not up to the task. As we said in that very clip, he says he's going to have a quiet school, and he can't even enforce that. Like many authority figures, he believes that he should be able to make it so simply because of his position. Many of us who are parents have made that same mistake, and Snyder does not learn. Do you remember what happened to Principal Snyder? Yes, he's eaten by the mayor who's turned into a giant snake. In the series finale of the season finale of season 3, and it's to his credit, I suppose, that he has the courage to stand up to the mayor. But even then, it's all about his, keeping control at the graduation ceremony. And he says, "This is not orderly. This is not discipline." And he looks up at the serpent and says, "This is my camp. You're on my campus, buddy. And when I say I want quiet," and then he's eaten. So, in both cases, Flutie and Snyder seem to operate out of rigid ideas about how a school should be done, even though they disagree. There's no attempt to understand or adapt to the needs of individual students or to the reality of living on the Hellmouth. Despite his law and order image, in fact, Snyder collaborates in the cover-up of demonic activity with the corrupt police department and the mayor's office. So far from being part of the solution, he's part of the problem. As for the teachers of Sunnydale High, most of them are just irrelevant. Unless they get killed or they are a killer, most of them just don't seem to have much impact at all. Except for the one person at Sunnydale who has a significant teaching role in Buffy's life, and that is Giles, right. And that's important for us to notice because his teaching role with Buffy is rooted in his relationship with her, in knowing her and being attuned to who she is and her skills and her needs. They grow and change together, the Watcher and the Slayer, and he often protects her from the more fixed, authoritarian ideas and expectations of the Watcher's Council. With Buffy, some flexibility is required, he tells the Slayer Kendra, who is appalled by the way that he trains Buffy. We feel our way as we go along. And when Buffy is shocked to find out that there's a Slayer handbook that she's never even seen, Giles said, it would not have been useful in your case. Giles sees Buffy not as sort of a dehumanized or objectified Slayer, not even just another student, but as a person, special, worthy of the attentiveness and responsiveness he shows, albeit imperfectly, in their years together. Now, the end of Buffy's high school career, that same episode where Snyder is eaten by the snake, the high school is blown up. If the subtext often becomes the text in Buffy, the blowing up of the Center of Learning on graduation day may indicate that Whedon is skeptical that factory models of education can ever really transmit meaningful wisdom or create virtuous persons. Shifting to the government, and for those of us who are homeschoolers, you know, some of us call them, even public schools we call them government schools. Public education is an arm of the government and an expression of both its virtues and its vices. And the negative depiction of public education is part of a much larger depiction of institutions in the Whedonverse, and not just government. In fact, really, any institution that holds power in the Whedonverse, it's usually not portrayed in a positive light. Can you think of, anywhere in the Whedonverse, what institutions? Rossum Corporation, what? Wolfram and Hart?
The Alliance.
Yeah, the Initiative,
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
The police and the zombie. There was a zombie episode in Angel where the police were all.
Oh, yeah, the police are usually in the mix somewhere.
Say Wolfram and Hart.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, the corporation behind, what did you start to say, Jim?
The two movies of this year, even
Yeah.
the two, even Shield becomes shadowy.
Right. They uncover this kind of weapons development that S.H.I.E.L.D. is secretly doing, and then there's the corporation that's behind the cabin in the woods. Yes, as I said, institutions that hold power in the Whedonverse are treated as inefficient, inadequate, and misguided, kind of like Foodie, at best. At worst, they are intrusive, dehumanizing, ruthlessly utilitarian. They rely on surveillance, regulation of behavior, and coercion, more like Snyder on a large scale. And nowhere is this more clearly depicted than in Firefly, which may be the most political thing that Whedon has ever done. If we can pull up clip 3, this is the opening to the movie Serenity. Have many of you, some of you, seen the movie?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And in this case, let me get this set up. It starts with a voiceover, which we then see is actually a teacher instructing her children, her classroom of students, on the history of the Alliance and the war that by which they defeated the Independents, including Mal.
Earth that was could no longer sustain our numbers. We were so many. We found a new solar system. Dozens of planets and hundreds of moons. Each one terraformed, a process taking decades to support human life, to be new Earths. The central planets formed the Alliance. Ruled by an interplanetary parliament, the Alliance was a beacon of civilization. The savage outer planets were not so enlightened and refused Alliance control. The war was devastating. But the Alliance's victory over the Independents ensured a safer universe. And now, everyone can enjoy the comfort and enlightenment of true civilization.
Why were the Independents even fighting us? Why wouldn't they look to be more civilized?
I hear they're cannibals.
That's only Reavers. Reavers aren't real. Well, they are. I heard they attack settlers from space and kill them and wear their skins and rape them for hours and hours.
Baituo and Dinitian. It's true that there are dangers on the outer planets. So with so many social and medical advancements we can bring to the Independents, why would they fight so hard against us?
Metal.
River?
People don't like to be meddled with. We tell them what to do, what to think. Don't run, don't walk. We're in their homes and in their heads, and we haven't the right. We're meddlesome.
River. We're not telling people what to think. We're just trying to show them how.
And at at the end of that, the teacher has taken the stylus out of River's hand, and then on that last line, she jabs it into River's head, and it cuts to a scene of River being experimented on by the Alliance. This is sort of a flashback, flash farther back, whatever, kind of scene. But you hear that tension between the Alliance's perception of itself as just trying to bring civilization and enlightenment to all of these planets, and River's assertion that you met resistance because you meddle, and people don't want to be meddled with. Firefly is probably the most libertarian show that ever made it on the air. Which is funny, because Joss Whedon is very, he said, I'm not a libertarian, I don't agree with Mal Reynolds' politics. The showrunner on Firefly was Tim Minear, who is politically more libertarian, and so sometimes I think we're hearing his voice as much as Joss's, which is often the case. I mean, in fairness, we're talking about Joss Whedon, but the influence of people like Jane Espenson or Marty Noxon or Drew Goddard, let's think of them as Team Whedon and recognize that they've got some credit coming to them too. So there are two, kind of philosophically, there are two kinds of liberty, negative and positive. Negative liberty is non-interference. It's the freedom from obstacles, basically being left alone to make your own choices without external constraints. And Mal would say that's the freedom he wants. He just wants to be left alone to do what he wants to do, kind of to not be under anybody's heel, he says in one scene, to I just want to live. Freedom from. And then there's positive freedom, which is often articulated as empowerment to achieve self-mastery, to become the best possible you. And that's something that some would say has to be given to you in a way. And for instance, universal, compulsory public education is an expression of the idea of positive freedom, that people have to have education in order to be empowered. Universal health care is a positive freedom. I'm not making any commentary on what's good or bad here. It's just a different kind of philosophy about how to bring liberty to people. And the people who would support that idea would say without access to those things, it's just a Hobbesian nightmare where if you're on the wrong end of society, life is nasty, brutish, and short, you know. However, Firefly argues that the impulse that the Alliance has to create positive liberty can result in tyranny. If the goal of positive liberty is to help you become the best possible you, it's worth noticing that those who control the institutions of power also control the definition of best. And this is certainly true of the Alliance. Joss Whedon did not want to make another evil empire, as in Star Wars. He said he wanted it to evoke more of America in a lot of ways. He said sometimes the Alliance is like America in Nazi Germany, and sometimes the Alliance is like America in Vietnam, or Iraq, or we could draw all kinds of analogies. The Alliance intends to make a better world. That's said explicitly by the operative in Serenity. This gives them license to impose their vision of an ideal world on others for their own good. And once that goal is accepted, a utilitarian ethic justifies the greater good at the expense of the individual. Consider what the Alliance did to River Tam when she was still just a child, experimenting on her. Or, to leave that show for a minute, what the Shadow Men did to the first Slayer in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. For the greater good of fighting evil, they destroyed this young woman and turned her into something completely other. Individuals can be risked or sacrificed without their consent for abstract goals. And as we'll see again when we look at Whedon's treatment of religion, true believers are dangerous. True believers in God, true believers in the goal of the Alliance or some other system of power. This is certainly true of the operative in the Firefly movie. I almost had a trivia question on the actor's name because I just think it's a fun name to say.
She would tell like it for.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I looked up the correct pronunciation. I guess I've been saying it wrong all my life, or all of his acting career. Chiwetel Ejiofor is what it said on the internet, but he's a true believer in a way that ties religion and governmental power together. Inara describes him and says he's intelligent, methodical, and devout in his belief that killing River is the right thing to do. And I'm going to show you another clip from Serenity. This is after the crew of Serenity is running from him, from the operative who is out to capture and kill River. And they've found sanctuary in this kind of border colony called Haven, where Shepherd Book is living. They left, they've returned and found that everyone in the colony has been killed. Then after returning to the ship, the operative contacts Mal over Serenity's comm system, and this is the conversation they have. This is clip 4, I think. I've lost count, but it says 4 here.
I'm sorry. If your quarry goes to ground, leave no ground to go to. You should have taken my offer. Or did you think none of this was your fault?
I don't know the children.
I do. If I have to.
Why? Do you even know why they send you?
It's not my place to ask. I believe in something greater than myself. A better world. A world without sin.
So me and mine gotta lay down and die so you can live in your better world.
I'm not going to live there. There's no place for me there, any more than there is for you. Malcolm, I'm a monster. What I do is evil. I have no illusions about it, but it must be done.
Keep talking. You're not getting the location trace off this wave.
And every minute you keep Rivertown from me, more people will die.
You think I care?
Of course you care. You're not a Reaver, Mal. You're a human man, and you will never understand how.
You can hear the operative expressing that sort of any means necessary to reach the goal idea. I believe in something that's greater than myself, a better world, a world without sin. And then he goes on to say he knows what he's doing is evil, but it has to be done. Which reminded me of a lot of seminars we've heard over the years about redemptive violence and the person who will sort of sacrifice their own place in society to become the slayer or the one who exacts violence to create a civilization that the rest of us can live in. That's kind of how the operative sees himself. The Alliance, and certainly the operative himself, genuinely believes it's doing what's best for everyone, including the Rim and Border worlds who fought unification. They assume that the Independents can't comprehend what's best for them, and it's this arrogance that leads to the Alliance trying to socially engineer on the Miranda colony. They sought the ability to chemically pacify the population by dosing the air with what they nicknamed Pax. It worked only too well, as many of you would remember. One of the scientists who was killed in this experiment leaves a holographic message explaining what happened. She says the people here have stopped fighting, and then they stopped everything else. They stopped going to work, stopped breeding, talking, eating. There are 30 million people here, and they all just let themselves die. The world without sin that Mal and his crew find is a world full of corpses. It's this action, when Mal and his crew uncover this through River, that finally leads Mal to stop dodging the Alliance and to take it on. Because most of the series, he's not confronting the Alliance, he just wants to be left alone to kind of do his shady business, which in a way supports the Alliance. You know, taking those supplies to the border colonies helps to keep those colonies pacified. You could argue that he's kind of playing along with the system. But in the movie, he decides to take the Alliance straight on. The sovereign state will never content itself with promoting negative freedom, is the conclusion that he reaches, and it will always lead to tyranny. As he is encouraging his crew to join him in this, he says they will try again, maybe on another world, maybe on this very ground, swept clean. A year from now, 10, they'll swing back to the belief that they can make people better, and I do not hold to that. So no more running. I aim to misbehave. So, as we wrap up this session, we'll ask ourselves, are those our idols? Institutional education, the centralized power of the state, I didn't really get into science and technology for lack of time, but those two often come under pretty intense scrutiny in the Whedonverse. But certainly that centralized power here at Cornerstone, you know, anarchists get a fair hearing here, right? But perhaps in our churches, in our broader society, Whedon is not entirely off base in seeing that Christians are sometimes complicit when those powers go wrong. Tomorrow we will go closer to home when we look at the family as an idol and his critique of religion. That's a pretty good time. Does anyone have a question? Okay. You're going to wrap up early. I was afraid I would go long. Or a comment? Argument? We had 2 hours of political arguments at the campsite yesterday. Dave Canfield took one side, and there were like 8 of us on the other. All right.
Did you do all 5 of those, or just
Yeah, it should have been 5.
I skipped one? Oh. You know what? It's because I shifted the family a session over. That's why. Because the first session was going to run too long otherwise. Thank you for that reminder. Okay, well, I guess she'll just be done early today then. Thank you. Don't forget, if you got a poster, come get your posters.
That's my mom right there.
It's fun to be the one that gets the A. As long as... Okay, it's always